A ranger found an RV abandoned in a remote wilderness area with its lights still on after sunset. Investigators assumed its occupants had wandered off and gotten lost. The doors were closed. The windows were intact. No one was inside. Months later, a disturbing discovery revealed the RV hadn't been abandoned at all, exposing evidence that transformed a simple disappearance into a serious crime. Like and subscribe to the channel if you like this story. A family of 4 had been there hours earlier. By morning, the campsite sat unnaturally still. There were no footprints leading into the trees. No sign that anyone had run, fought, or called for help. A generator hummed weakly, nearly out of fuel, keeping the interior lights alive for no one at all. The forest became the first suspect. That assumption came easily. The campground sat deep in central Oregon, surrounded by dense timber, steep ravines, and terrain that dropped away without warning. Rangers had seen it before. Visitors underestimated the dark. Weather turned without notice. One bad decision could scatter a family into miles of wilderness. Search teams arrived before noon. Helicopters traced slow arcs above the canopy. Dogs worked the perimeter, noses low to damp earth and pine needles. Volunteers lined trails and creek beds, calling names that echoed and vanished. The working theory settled quickly. The family had wandered off after dusk, disoriented, and paid the price. Everything about the site seemed to support it. Inside the RV, life looked paused rather than interrupted. Shoes were lined neatly by the door. Phones sat charging on the counter. A pot soaked in the sink, half cleaned. One child's stuffed bear lay near the edge of a bed as if dropped mid-step. Wallets remained untouched. Keys hung from their hook. A folded map rested on the table, open to the campground page, a blue pen circle marking their spot. Nothing appeared stolen. Investigators traced the family's final known movements. Gas station footage from earlier that day showed normalcy. Smiles, light arguing over snacks, the father filling propane while the kids waited in the car. No one followed them. The RV pulled into the campground just before sunset and never appeared on another camera again. Rain arrived that night, steady and unforgiving. By morning, any fragile trace left behind had blurred into mud. Dogs lost the scent near a nearby creek. Search grids expanded outward, then doubled again. Ravines were checked. Rivers dragged. Cliffs scanned. Nothing surfaced. As days passed, language shifted. Officials stopped using the word search. Press briefings leaned toward familiarity, not alarm. Families got lost. Nature was dangerous. This was tragic but not mysterious. The case moved from urgency to inevitability, reframed as a presumed exposure incident rather than a disappearance. The campground reopened within weeks. Time did what the forest could not. Birthdays passed without candles. A child's school desk stayed empty. Mail piled up at a locked house miles away. Online forums filled with speculation where answers should have been. Some believed the family chose to vanish. Others blamed wildlife or a sudden accident no one witnessed. A smaller group whispered about something older in those woods, but those voices were quickly drowned out by logic and fatigue. Eventually the case went quiet. 5 years later, silence broke. A late summer storm stalled over the mountains, dumping days of heavy rain onto ground already weakened by erosion. A Forest Service maintenance crew was sent to inspect a remote access road near the old campground after reports of washouts. When they arrived, the road no longer existed. A sinkhole had opened where packed gravel once ran, wide enough to swallow a truck. Fresh earth slumped inward along jagged edges, roots dangling like torn wires. As workers assessed the damage, something unnatural caught the light at the bottom. Metal. Not loose debris. Not discarded equipment. Something shaped. As mud slid away, curved siding appeared, followed by faded paint and a broken mirror hanging at an angle. The call went out immediately. Deputies arrived under low clouds and mist. Rain pooled inside the crater as flashlights cut through the gloom. White fiberglass emerged. Blue striping followed. The outline became impossible to deny. An RV. Records confirmed it within minutes. Same make. Same year. Registered to the family that vanished half a decade earlier. Relief flickered across the scene. At last, a clean answer. The ground had collapsed. The forest had hidden the truth. Time and erosion had done the rest. That relief didn't last. The RV wasn't positioned like something that had simply fallen. Its front end was crushed inward, not downward. Scrape marks lined one side. The roof damage didn't match a vertical collapse. And the door stood open. A camera was lowered slowly into the hole. What appeared on the screen didn't fit the story anyone had been telling. The camera feed flickered as it descended, the image shaking with every shift of wet soil. Mud streaked the lens, but enough remained clear to reveal the RV's interior through the open door. Cabinets hung ajar. Cushions were displaced. The floor wasn't layered with debris the way a sudden collapse would leave it. Instead, the space looked disturbed, as if movement had happened after the RV stopped moving. Deputies exchanged looks before anyone spoke. Recovery crews stabilized the sinkhole walls and began a controlled excavation. The process took days. Each inch of earth removed exposed more damage that didn't line up with the official explanation written years earlier. The RV's undercarriage showed scraping, not impact. One side panel had deep horizontal gouges, consistent with being dragged. The tires were intact. No skid marks suggesting a loss of control. When the vehicle was finally lifted free, the smell came first. Inside, investigators documented everything exactly as it lay. Phones still sat on the counter, long dead. Clothing was scattered but not torn. The map remained on the table, blue circles still visible. The stuffed bear was no longer on the bed. It was wedged beneath a cabinet near the door. No bodies were found inside. That absence forced a question no one wanted to answer. If the family hadn't been in the RV when it entered the sinkhole, then where had they gone? And if they had left willingly, why abandon wallets, keys, shoes, and shelter in the middle of the night? Forensic teams worked through the wreckage inch by inch. Soil samples showed the RV had been underground for years, consistent with the storm timeline. What didn't match was the damage pattern. The front-end compression suggested force from ahead, not gravity from above. The scrape marks lined up with something pulling the vehicle forward before it dropped. A nearby stretch of forest drew sudden attention. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to scan the area surrounding the collapse. The results showed disturbed earth extending away from the sinkhole in a rough line, as if something heavy had passed through long before the storm revealed it. The disturbance ended near a shallow ravine less than a quarter-mile from the original campsite. Search teams returned, this time without volunteers or media. The area was taped off. Soil was carefully removed. Within hours, they found the first item: a child's sneaker. It was partially buried, laces still tied, toes scuffed as if dragged. A few yards away, a second shoe appeared, smaller, belonging to the younger child. No tracks surrounded them. No clear direction of travel. Just objects separated from the people who wore them. The narrative shifted again. Wildlife experts were consulted, then quietly dismissed. No predator in the region behaved this way. No known animal removed multiple people from a secured vehicle without leaving blood or signs of a struggle. Accidental exposure no longer fit either. The evidence suggested movement, separation, and time. Investigators expanded the search radius. In the ravine, beneath layers of fallen branches and sediment, they uncovered something that had been missed 5 years earlier. A depression in the ground, roughly rectangular, its edges unnatural beneath the decay. When it was cleared, wooden planks appeared, rotted and broken inward. It wasn't a grave. It was a cover. Below it sat a hollow space reinforced with old timber and rusted metal supports. A chamber dug into the earth decades earlier, long before the campground existed. Inside were remnants of human presence. Discarded food containers, scraps of fabric, a length of rope stiff with age. At the far end of the space, a flashlight beam caught on something pale. Bone. Forensic teams halted the dig and secured the site. What they recovered over the next 2 days confirmed the worst fears. Human remains belonging to more than one individual. Some recent. Some far older. The site had been used repeatedly, not just once. Record searches revealed nothing official about the structure. Local historians were brought in and pointed to vague references from decades past. Rumors of an unmarked work camp tied to a defunct logging operation that shut down suddenly after unexplained incidents. The Oregon family was no longer an isolated tragedy. It was part of something larger. As investigators pieced together timelines, another detail resurfaced from the original disappearance. A campground logbook entry from the night the family vanished, written by a neighboring camper who checked out early. The note mentioned hearing an engine after midnight, low and steady, coming from the forest rather than the road. That engine was never identified. And no one ever explained how a family could vanish from a locked RV without a sound, only to be found years later beside a structure that was never supposed to exist. The discovery forced state authorities to take over the case. What had once been written off as a wilderness tragedy was reclassified as a criminal investigation, with multiple victims and an unknown timeline. The Forest Service closed the campground indefinitely, citing safety concerns that went unexplained to the public. Forensic analysis of the remains took months. The family was identified through dental records and fragments of clothing recovered from the underground chamber. Evidence suggested they had been held alive for a period of time. Soil layers and insect activity pointed to days, not hours. The children's remains were found deeper inside the structure, separated from the parents by a collapsed timber wall. That detail alone changed everything. Investigators reconstructed the final night as carefully as possible. The RV had not entered the sinkhole on its own. Tire alignment and gouge patterns indicated it was moved slowly, deliberately, using sustained force. A winch was considered, then dismissed when metal filings were found embedded in nearby tree bark, consistent with heavy chains rather than cable. Someone had the equipment. Someone had the time. Someone knew the terrain well enough to avoid being seen. The underground chamber told a longer story. Some of the bones recovered dated back decades. Clothing fragments matched styles from the late 1970s through the early 2000s. Missing persons databases were quietly cross-checked. At least 3 unresolved disappearances from surrounding counties suddenly shared geographic overlap with the site, cases once thought unrelated because of time gaps and circumstances. The forest hadn't just hidden one crime. It had preserved many. Attention turned to land records and logging operations from the mid-20th century. One company name surfaced repeatedly, tied to temporary camps and unregistered work crews that moved frequently to avoid regulation. Former employees were located, most elderly, some reluctant to speak. One man finally admitted there were places in those woods no one went back to, dug quickly and abandoned when projects ended or accidents happened. He refused to elaborate. The engine noise mentioned in the old logbook took on new significance. Investigators determined it matched the sound profile of a portable industrial generator, not a vehicle. That kind of equipment could power lights, tools, even ventilation underground. It also explained why no headlights were ever reported on the road that night. The theory that emerged was deeply unsettling. The family likely never left the RV willingly. Evidence suggested they were approached after dark, possibly under the guise of assistance. No signs of forced entry were found because none were needed. Once outside, they were overpowered quietly and taken into the forest. The RV was moved later, emptied of people, then dragged toward unstable ground to erase its location entirely. The sinkhole didn't cause the crime. It revealed it. Despite the scale of the findings, no suspects were ever publicly named. Whoever built and used the chamber understood isolation and patience. The last confirmed activity at the site predated modern surveillance, cell coverage, and trail cameras. By the time the storm collapsed the earth, the people responsible were either gone or buried beneath time as effectively as their victims once were. Officials released only fragments of information. Cause of death was withheld. Exact timelines were sealed. Families connected to older cases were notified quietly, without press conferences or explanations. The site was filled in, reinforced, and marked as environmentally unstable land. Nothing was ever built there again. Today the stretch of forest looks unchanged. Trees have grown back over disturbed soil. Moss covers the scars left by excavation equipment. Hikers pass nearby without knowing what once existed beneath their feet. No marker indicates the chamber. No sign mentions the family. The original campground sign still stands miles away, weathered but readable. The site number where the RV once sat has been removed from the map entirely, replaced with blank space. Records list the case as resolved. The file says the family was located. It does not say how they were taken. It does not say who built the chamber. It does not say how long it was used before the forest finally gave it up. Only one detail remains unexplained. Among the items recovered from the chamber was a flashlight found near the entrance, its casing corroded but intact. Inside, the batteries had been replaced recently, long after the family disappeared, long after the RV was buried, long after the site was supposedly abandoned. Someone had been there, and no one ever found out who.